Thanks to the library. Thanks to the return participants and the new people. It was great last week, and I think this week, you know, as has been stated, it will be action-packed. And just to give you kind of a roadmap of how it will unfold, I'm going to start in a moment sharing my screen, and we'll go over a few brief definitions of what flash nonfiction is, and then we're going to read one sort of craft essay about, I think if I teach you one thing about flash nonfiction, this is a craft essay that touches on arguably the most important element. And then we'll read one essay itself, and we'll do two writing exercises. So one based on each of the longer, although since it's flash, they're short readings. And I don't like to pin down genres too much, like to turn into the genre police, but I do think definitions are useful just to have kind of that constraint or restriction to push against or work toward. And so I will say that for Rose Metal Press, the publishing company that I co-run with my friend Abby, we have chosen to define flash nonfiction as having a cap of 1,000 words. So, you know, anything up to and including 1,000 words, we consider you to have written a flash nonfiction. Other people, you know, just like last week with flash fiction, define it differently. But I think, you know, 1,000 is one of the standards. So that's something to keep in mind. And I will start sharing my screen and talk about some other ways that people have chosen to define it. So hopefully, can everybody see this? It's good. Excellent. If you can't see it, let me know. So this is some definitions that come to us from the Rose Metal Press Field Guide to Flash Nonfiction, and that's co-edited by Dinty W. Moore here. And he co-runs Brevity magazine, where they say it's 700 or maybe it's 750, but they do an even shorter limit. And I would say, you know, if you're taking notes, you don't have to take notes if you don't want to, but if you take one note from this sheet and don't already know it, I would say just go to Brevity. The link is down here, but it's brevitymag.com. And Dinty founded it in the late 90s. And so in, you know, online literary journal years, that's ancient, right? It's an elder statesman. It's so old. He's had such longevity with this website. And I think it's an incredible resource for flash nonfiction in particular, but just writing in general. He's a great person to know about and just a great literary citizen. So in his introduction to this book that he co-edited for us, he says that there's this thing called an essaykin, right? An essaykin is a term created by William Makepeace Thackeray, who, if those of you are fans of, you know, novels from the 1800s, he wrote Vanity Fair. And Vanity Fair, I love it so much, but it's huge. It's one of those like doorstopper books. So it's interesting to me that he wrote this like monster piece of fiction, but then he also talked about tiny flash nonfictions, essaykins. So he says, in these humble essaykins, I have taken leave to egotize. So I like that term. Even though essaykin never really happened, but I just start with that because I think sometimes these flash forms can seem like they're brand new. And I think they're popular, you know, now for various reasons, but I think sometimes people have the mistaken idea that flash is only popular now because the internet or because we're reading stuff on our phones. And actually, you know, like flash fiction, flash nonfiction has existed for a long time. So Dinty says, though trying to pin down any art form too strictly is ultimately a fruitless exercise, I've come up with what I think is an apt metaphor. Imagine there is a fire burning deep in the forest. In an essay of conventional length, the reader begins at the forest's edge and is taken on a hike, perhaps a meandering stroll, into those woods in search of that fire. The further in the reader goes with each page that turns, the more the reader begins to sense smoke in the air, or maybe heat, or just an awareness that something ahead is smoldering. In a very brief essay, however, the reader is not a hiker, but a smoke jumper, one of those brave firefighters who jump out of planes and land 30 yards from where the forest fire is burning. The writer starts the reader right at that spot, at the edge of the fire, or as close as one can get without touching the actual flame. There is no time to walk in. The brief essay, in other words, needs to be hot from the first sentence, and the heat must remain the entire time. My fire metaphor, it is important to note, does not refer to incendiary subject matter. The heat might come from language, from image, from voice or point of view, from revelation or suspense, but there must always be a burning urgency of some sort translated through each sentence, starting with the first. So, last week we kind of talked a lot about conciseness and compression, and how in flash fiction compression is crucial. You can't like unspool the plot. You can't like linger around with characters. You have to kind of cut to the heart. And I think that's equally true for flash nonfiction. But I think, again, if you were a note taker, this idea of urgency, I think, is really crucial. I think nonfiction at its best is always animated by urgency, kind of a really immediate answer to the question of, why would I want to read this, or what am I supposed to get from this? And I think flash nonfiction distills that further. So urgency. And then he also quotes Judith Kitchen, who edited the, I think, pretty famous in the world of flash in short series. It was this set of anthologies that was of flash nonfiction. And so she says, I often use a snowball metaphor. You've got all this stuff out there called snow, but when you gather it all up and really pack it together, and you throw it off, there's a sting. I think with these short pieces, even when they're quiet and meditative, the effect is a little sting. And so I've tried to pick, the essay that we're going to read tonight, I think has that sting. So, not that it's unpleasant, but that even though it's short, it kind of hits you. So if you want to see more, craft stuff, I recommend, Dinty's first book, The Field Guide to Flash Nonfiction. And then just this past fall, we published one called The Best of Brevity. And he co-edited that with Zoe Bozier, who is awesome as well. And they just picked, this 20-year history of brevity, like the pieces that they considered the best of the best. So if you like some of what you're reading tonight, that is a great place to find more, or just go to the website. You don't even need to get the book, although I hope you might. So what we have, like I said, here is this piece by Sue Williams Silverman, and it's a craft essay. So she's talking about this thing called Writing Through Innocence and Experience, Voices in Flash Nonfiction. So I'm talking a lot, which, it's my workshop, so that's okay, but I would love to hear another voice if anybody wants to volunteer to read this out loud so we can hear what she's saying. And then I might pause you when we get to the bold stuff and jump in after that, but feel free to just unmute yourself and go for it.
I'd be happy to read.
All right, thank you.
Hold on one second. Okay. The I in creative nonfiction is a literary device used to enhance and explore complicated truths. Just as we are complex people in life, we must be equally complex personas on the page. One way to accomplish this exploration of self is through the use of voice, but not one's everyday voice. In real life, for example, I don't speak or write emails using carefully crafted language. When talking to friends, I'm not particularly mindful of word choice. I don't use sensory imagery or think metaphorically. My speech meanders, full of half-developed ideas. In other words, a spoken informal voice, though it can be breathless or intimate, is rarely as artistically structured as one that's literary. Using my flash nonfiction piece, I can never say this word, archipelago, thank you. As an example, let's say that at the time of the actual event, years before I wrote the essay, I confided in my sister as to why I didn't want to leave the West Indies. I would probably have said something like, I hate leaving. I don't want to live where it's cold. This brief explanation, while sincere, provides little insight or depth. Likewise, a diary voice can be intimate, but it doesn't shape life into art either. Here is a diary entry I could have written the night before leaving the island. I'm going to miss everything about St. Thomas. I hate even the thought of returning to the States where it's so gray and cold. These sentences are heartfelt but abstract, lacking sensory imagery. They don't bring the reader inside the experience. Neither of these voices, though they are authentically me, would work when writing flash nonfiction. Should I keep going?
Yeah, keep going.
Okay.
I'll stop you after this paragraph.
Okay, so who then narrates an essay? It's both me and not me. It's an artistically created me, comprised of two different voices that work in conjunction with each other: the voice of innocence and the voice of experience, labels loosely borrowed from the poet William Blake. Briefly, the voice of innocence describes the event. The voice of experience interprets and reflects upon it. Through the use of these voices, a writer maintains a cohesive narrative while also journeying into the core of self-discovery. In other words, the voices used in creative nonfiction artistically craft what you've lived in all its dimensions.
Great, thanks, Denise. So I'll jump in there for this next part because I
Okay.
think what she's saying is clear, but I'll interrupt it just a bit. And so she goes on and says, here's a fuller description. The voice of innocence relates to the fact of the story, the surface subject or action. It's the voice that tells us first this happened, then this next thing happened. Additionally, the voice of innocence reveals the raw, not yet understood emotions associated with the story's action by portraying the person you were and what you felt when the sequence of events actually took place. And so just to pause there, again, you don't have to take notes. There's not going to be a quiz. But I think, the voice of innocence is kind of like if you can divide yourself into like your present self, your adult self, the self who's like looking back and narrating the event. And then your past self, the voice of innocence is obviously that past self. And I think sometimes we think, when we're writing about something from the past, especially childhood, we have to keep it only in that child voice. Like our essay, can only talk about what we knew when we were 10. But I think what William Silverman is saying is that's actually not true. You need that, but then you also need to add this second voice as kind of an overlay because your, past self experienced it, but now you have the wisdom to kind of interpret it. So another way that I could think of it is like if your voice of innocence is just recounting the story, it's almost your like voice of experience is coming in and giving the plot, right? So the story is just what happened. The plot is the causality or the why we care. So I'll just keep going from here, take it over from Denise and just keep going. The voice of experience adds a more mature voice or persona that in effect explains and deepens the voice of innocence with metaphor, irony, and reflection. This voice offers the progression of thought in creative nonfiction by imagining what the voice of innocence, facts, and raw emotions means. This more complex viewpoint interprets and reflects upon the surface subject. Say, for example, the voice of innocence describes feeling lonely. Then the voice of experience seeks to understand why you're lonely, what it means, what are the ramifications of past occurrences and behaviors, what are the metaphors that deepen the events. With this voice, you transform the lived moment rather than merely recollecting it. Generally speaking, these two voices are flexible and can be introduced at any time during your essay as needed. We're not going to read, we don't have time since it's only an hour to read Archipelago, so I'm not going to, read this part. But I do think that, sort of like as you do it yourself, I think you'll get what she's saying, where you kind of have to have this combination of both. And so rather than reading the rest of her essay, I want to point out her prompt, because that's the great thing about this book is it gives you the craft essay, the prompt, and then an example. And so this one can be a little tricky. So I want to give you this prompt and then field any questions and then give you a full 10 minutes to play with it, because I really think it can sound easy to be like past, present, innocence, experience, but I think when you're actually doing it, you kind of need to like stretch out. So this is her exercise. Using the voice of innocence, describe one specific image of your childhood hometown. For example, you could begin by writing, walking to school during an ice storm, I slide from one sidewalk square to the next. This sentence conveys a straightforward rendition of what happened, typical of the voice of innocence. Next, using the voice of experience, continue to describe this wintry day in such a way that it metaphorically conveys how you feel about it, reflecting back, incorporating knowledge and language that you lacked in the past. Icicles spike down from rooftops and cover window panes like jail bars. When I walk to school during the storm, the air smells blank, scentless, as if the whole town is encased in ice. How will I be able to chip through winter and breathe as I wait for spring? By using words such as jail bars, blank, encased in ice, I show the reader what this town and winter felt like, what it meant to me. I am able, in short, through the voice of experience, to bring the reader inside my cold, icy world. So I think, just one more metaphor, one more way to think of it, right? If it's innocence, experience, if it's I now, looking back on I then in the past, it's also, as she has said a few times, like the voice of innocence is a little more surfacey, a little more matter of fact, a little just taking things as they are. And the voice of experience is what comes in and gets deeper and adds those layers that make a piece of writing satisfying. So we're not gonna exactly do that exercise, but I'm gonna stop sharing. I will give you like the real prompt in a second, but I wanted to see if anyone had, hopefully that was clear, but if anyone had questions about the difference or any observations they want to share. All right, cool. So basically keep everything she said in mind, but the prompt that I would actually like you to do, just because I think it can be hard when you're doing technique to come up with content, is take a major first. So something from your life, obviously, since it's nonfiction, and you won't have to share this. We'll talk about how it felt to write, but you can pick anything. It can be embarrassing, funny, sad. You're not going to have to share this, so you don't have to worry how it's going to go over with the people here. Just the first time that you did something significant, maybe the first lie that you told, the first time you saw the ocean, your first kiss, the first time you drove a car, the first time you realized your parents were going to die someday, just any kind of first that you think you can write about for about 10 minutes. And then as you write about it, kind of try to do what she suggested. Take that content and start really clearly in your I then, your voice of innocence. And then deliberately add your I now, your voice of experience. So you start with past and then present reflection, and then go from there. I'm not going to say you have to do just like A, B, but try to toggle back and forth. Like as you write about this thing for the next 10 minutes, see how you can manipulate that surface and that depth, that past naivete and that present wisdom. So questions? All right, we're gonna write for about 10 minutes. You're not gonna share it, but at the end we'll have 5 minutes to share how it felt. So good luck. All right, so you're halfway there. That's been 5 minutes. You have 5 more, so keep playing with that toggle. Two-minute warning. All right, so that was 10 minutes. Hopefully you got something. This definitely is meant to be a generative workshop. So if you don't have a full 750 word draft, that is expected. But I did kind of want to see for two things. Like first, I would be so curious to know what your first was. So if it's not too embarrassing, feel free to drop it in the chat, like what your first that you chose to write about was. And then also if you want to unmute yourself and just jump in and speak to how it felt to write like that, like how it felt to write with past and present innocence and experience top of mind.
It was hard. I had to really be conscious of, once I start the first part of it, it's hard then to change gears. And really you're kind of turning, purposely turning the corner and stopping the first thought. Mine was on, I vividly remember when I first used the internet. I mean, it was just, starting out, and it was in an office. And I remember clicking on that blue E, and I was so scared. And I was an executive assistant, and I would have other people on the team research stuff for me because I didn't want to do it. And so, so then when I flipped over to the other voice, it was me looking back and saying, oh my gosh, how I use the internet just so automatically and assume it's there. And I access it from one of my 3 computers or my tablet or my phone, or, It didn't come out perfectly, but I do vividly remember, and it was a long time ago. So I remember it well.
That's a great choice. That's awesome. Any other observations? And it's quite possible, kind of like Denise said, that it felt artificial or interruptive to kind of like really emphasize that toggle. But other thoughts or experiences, positive, negative, or neutral?
I feel like I'm too often in the observer voice, so it actually felt nice to limit myself to not enforce a more perspective, and just to kind of stick to some of the details. And when I was doing that, I really thought back for very specific things. And when I switched, I was like, the details that I'd come up with sort of influenced where I went. So it was nice. It was a good exercise. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, thank you so much. Other observations? And I think to jump off what Alana just said, like, I think, yeah, it works both ways. I think, everyone, like when you do kind of break your habit of mind down like this in such a, A or B kind of way, you can't help but realize, like, maybe you already knew, but you really realize like, oh yeah, I'm really, really inclined to write a lot and deeply about the past, but I'm less inclined to do the reflection. Or conversely, you might say, oh my gosh, I'm so in my head, all I do is reflection, and I do really need to get in there and concretize the thing I'm reflecting on. So I think it kind of works both ways. Other observations? Also, I just want to point out all the things in the chat are so great. Amy just said the first, and it turned out only time my mother tried to teach me how to drive. Liz says the first time she saw mountains and kids playing hacky sack in Idaho. Yes, very good, very specific. All of these are great. So if you haven't already, look in the chat. And I always think it's fun to see what other people choose to write about, because maybe you'll see it and be like, oh my gosh, when did I first see mountains? And you could do your own version. We got, first apartment. Oh, wow, I love this. First time I told a joke in kindergarten. Yeah, first varsity football game I attended. And Laura, yeah, the first time, to put a dog to sleep, that you put that in quotes. And yeah, there's something so intense about the fact that we use that verb for what we're doing. So awesome, great. That's the time we have for that one. It's a fast hour, so we're gonna shift back. This time we're gonna read not a craft essay, but the story itself. And so kind of like last week, if you were here, but if you weren't, I'll tell you, everything is always form and content, right? There's always like the meaning and the material, the story you're telling, and then the way you choose to tell it, or if you want to say structure or technique, however you want to put it, like they're always together. You can't separate them, but I think you can think about them usefully as distinct entities. So if this first one was more like, maybe you were thinking more about, okay, what first, right? That's the content. You're like, what first am I going to talk about? This is going to foreground a little more, how am I going to write about it? It's going to be a little more, I don't want to say gimmicky, but it's going to be a little more high concept. So I'll go ahead and share my screen again. And here we go. So this, just a little background, this is, and then I'll ask for a volunteer. So maybe if somebody knows yoga, if anyone's a yoga person, I don't think these words are that hard to pronounce, especially if you've been in yoga class. So that would be my thing, but anyone can read it. But it's called An Indian in Yoga Class, Finding Imbalance. And it's by Rajpreet here. And it was in an issue of Brevity. You can see issue 60. So this is from Brevity magazine, which I dropped in the chat. And then it's also from that Best of Brevity anthology that I was mentioning. So anybody want to unmute and just hop in and give this a read? It's only 672 words, so it's not too demanding.
I'm a yoga teacher, I could probably.
All right, go for it.
Okay, so Sukhasana. All right, so it's called An Indian in Yoga Class, Finding Imbalance by Rajpreet Air. Sukhasana, my intent for today's practice, become more Indian. As an Indian from Indiana who has never been to India, I want to get in touch with my roots, and doing yoga seems like a fun way to do that. As we flutter our eyelids open, Brittany, the instructor, says, today we're going to focus on our third chakra, where Ganesh lives and Buddha sometimes visits. Unleash your Kali. I'm sick and I don't know my Hindu gods that well, except for a couple lessons from history classes, but I'm not sure Buddha is supposed to be included with them. But what do I know? Brittany is the authority on this stuff. Also, she has Sanskrit tattoos and I don't. Vinyasa. As everyone raises prayer hands to the ceiling for a sun salutation in time to Major Lazar, Kyle from the front desk sneaks in to photograph the class for the studio's Instagram page, just like the Indians did thousands of years ago. Hashtag you are enough, hashtag be here now, hashtag strength goals, hashtag yoga every goddamn day, hashtag namaste, hashtag mad relax, hashtag good vibes, hashtag namaste as fuck AF. Tadasana. Quote, pick a dristi. I know, such an exotic word, says Brittany. Would the name Christy be exotic in India? Or Misty, Rice Krispie? We only have distant relatives left in Indian. But I suppose I could ask my British relatives who go to India more frequently than my American side. Bakasana. I'm happy I got a spot in this class, the woman next to me says as we wait for Brittany to get us blocked. Brittany discovered yoga in 2009 and brought it to America. She knows everyone in India by name and the color of their aura. And she was asked to star in Slumdog Millionaire, but turned it down because the title made it seem like a movie on consumerism. I think about the $300 I paid for a 10-class card. Maybe the classes are expensive because the studio has exceptional instructors. Ardha Matsyendrasana. As I twist toward the wall, I see a poster for sari draping class taking place in the studio later this week for a sari draping class. I could ask my mom to teach me the next time I'm home, but Brittany probably knows more. Brittany has henna on her hands and a nose piercing, neither of which my mom has. Virabhadrasana. Standing strong in this pose, one hand reaching into the future toward juice generation and another reaching back toward the past, Starbucks. Stay in the present and think about how good you look in your Lululemons, Brittany instructs. Concentration is key here, or karma will not lead us to nirvana. An interruption. Kyle opens the door and walks down to the center of the room. He announces, yoga, it's a way of life, then throws clouds of turmeric into the air. People around me, others raise their hands to it in devotion, swaying side to side on their sits bones, while other yogis start snorting it off the hardwood floor. Hashtag bliss. Setu Bandha Sarvangasana. Rameshwarya, move your hands closer to the back of your heels. My name is actually Rajpreet, I reply. It's Rameshwarya, since I know Rameshwarya once. But my name is Rajpreet. No. Shavasana. Brittany explains this is the hardest pose and it really does feel like it. I don't feel relaxed. In fact, I feel more stressed than when I arrived. A white woman is teaching me about yoga, an ancient Indian practice, and she thinks she's an expert on Indian culture too, but I don't know exactly which ways I can be mad because I don't know enough about India or yoga myself, partly because I feel a pressure to assimilate. But darn it if Brittany's playlist isn't fun. Namaste. Parentheses, cultural appropriation in me bows to the Indian in you. Putting away mats. What other instructor would you recommend? I asked Brittany. Katie, Jenny, Julie, Courtney, Zoe, Christy, Mary, Lucy, Haley, Ashley, Natalie, Lindsay, Kaylee, Lizzie, and Audrey are amazed. Exit. I follow the trail of organic quinoa down the hall to the door and leave feeling very Indian American.
Thank you so much for reading that, and apologies for the couple typos that are in there. So things that probably, to be a little less Socratic than we might be, just to make sure we have time to write, things that I think mostly stand out are the headings, right? She's got this essay that's told in sections, and if you took those sections out, you would still get the story. You would still understand that it's an Indian in yoga class, but by structuring it based on sort of the flow of an actual yoga class, right? The poses that you go through, the chants that you might do, and then an interruption, right? Somebody coming into the class, and then even going all the way out, past all the poses to namaste, putting away mats, exit. She kind of uses the structure or the organization or the container, the form of a yoga class in kind of a strip mall in Indiana to tell this deeper story of her extremely ambivalent feelings about her own identity and cultural appropriation. And as she says, feeling very Indian American. So you might be able to anticipate where we could be going with this, but what I would like you to do, I think this kind of like the word loop from last week, those of you who are here, is an example of sort of what happens maybe when you take, so I guess to step back, I think the natural inclination many people as storytellers have is to focus on the story. Like the first thing that usually comes to people's mind is, what am I going to tell? What's my content? What am I talking about? But this time you're going to think simultaneously or even first about, how am I going to tell it? So I would like for you to take a pre-existing form of your choosing, and just you don't have to pick any of these, but just, if your mind is now just like, what is there besides yoga class? You could take a different kind of class, a board meeting, a school day, a restaurant menu, a marketing email, an instruction pamphlet or user's manual, a standard radio pop song, et cetera, and use that, like take that form and kind of like you saw Rajpreet doing, organize your essay based on that and see what using a pre-formed container to pour your story into does in terms of how you tell the story. And obviously Rajpreet's stroke of genius is taking this class or this container that has very much to do with the content that she seeks to explore. So you could do that where the things kind of go very hand in glove together, or you could go in the opposite direction and take something that seems disparate from the content and what happens when you have that tension of opposites. So anything like that is fine. We'll do that again for about 10 minutes and then we'll talk about it after and we'll go from there. So any questions? All right, have fun. All right, you're at the halfway point. Two-minute warning. All right, so that's about time. So hopefully, again, even if you didn't find sort of like the perfect draft, you have a good rough draft that you could possibly build on or try again with a different form. But I think maybe kind of similar, we only have like 6 minutes left, so time's flying, but if you want to drop in the chat what form you used, what found form you chose to write your piece in, and then if people want to unmute and sort of say how that felt to write that way, if it was easy, if it was hard, if you got stuck, if it just poured out, how did it go? Yay, these are great. Dictionary definitions, a school day class by class, a tweet thread, a series of tweets, and lyrics from a short song, a newscast, birthing stages. Did somebody want to chime in?
I liked it. I really liked the structure. And then I felt I kind of put myself back in high school, and I went through how it felt to go from a classroom into the hallway. And then, my mood would change depending on which class it was. And I really liked having that structure. And then I felt like it brought things back, and I took off with it. So I really liked that.
Yeah, that's great. I think, I kind of like the form ones too, because for me, they do kind of kick that off. They send me into, like places I can go that I wouldn't have gone before, which isn't to say it worked that way for everyone, but other thoughts? Just unmute yourself and hop in. Yeah, Tara.
Yeah, I actually had a lot of fun with it. I did an afternoon sailing, and I wrote from the point of view of a really experienced, confident sailor and how I felt after. So I started with a seasoned sailor and then me every time.
Nice. That's fantastic. Structure within structure. I love that. Other specific comments on how it felt to write? Yeah.
I created an album of made up songs about my butterflyless garden.
Oh, that's awesome.
Oh, I've only got about 5 or 6 songs, but I'm kind of aiming for a dozen. Then I kind of have to see about sequence and things like that. But actually, this is kind of what I was looking for, is something fun and different that I could kind of get into, and I can get into this.
Great. That sounds super fun. I'm excited about the album. That's great. Anybody else want to share like the experience or? Cool. Okay, so we only have like 2.5 minutes left, but I did just kind of want to end with sort of a summing up. And so I think, as much as I talked about, because it's in my wheelhouse, the Rose Medal Press field guides, and I specifically mentioned Brevity, which is, as I said, this online magazine that's dedicated to 750 word or fewer pieces. The great news, if you love this form or if you love Flash from last week, Flash Fiction, while there are devoted publications that specialize in Flash, more and more, I think more than any time before, since I've been paying attention, just mainstream and, kind of nationwide literary journals and anthologies and publications are very open to the Flash form. And you don't even necessarily have to make a big deal about saying like, oh, ahem, I'm submitting Flash. You can just kind of turn in your 1,000-word essay and maybe get it published. So if that's something you're aiming for, I think it's a great time to be doing this kind of work. And if you're not, you can also just write it for yourself. And I also think a lot of these ideas too, as much as this has been about prose and Flash fiction and Flash nonfiction, I do think they're separate forms, but if some of this felt to you like, oh, maybe it's prose poems, I think that can be I could teach a whole other workshop about prose poems sometime, but I think that could be a useful way to go too. So I guess if there's any final questions, I can answer them, but otherwise I just want to say thank you again to Julie and the Evergreen Park Library. These have been fantastic. It's been beautiful to get to spend my Tuesday night with you guys. So thank you.